Hello everyone, this is Lucky. We are in the Invisible Hand. Actually, this is part of the economics, chapter 1. So we are in the scientists Malthus and Ricardo. Malthus, an essay of the principle of the population 1798 was clear and logical. Left to itself, the population doubles every few decades, a geometrical increase, something like this. So 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, and so on. But once all the good land is in the use, the food supply cannot grow at the same rate. As best, we can hope for the arithmetical increase. So 1 into 2, 3, 4, and so on. The inevitable result, starvation. Progress, like ending disease and war, only makes things worse. Disease and war keep the population in balance with the food supply. Progress things, he said. Even charity is bad idea. Feed the starving today and you will have more people starving tomorrow. This is what he thinks. Malthus was right that we cannot have infinite population growth on a finite planet, or infinite economic growth for that matter. But Malthus, a person, downplayed birth control, even though some people used it back then. We just don't talk about it. The very poor didn't use birth control. They lacked the money to buy it and the education to understand what worked. Don't worry, baby, I'm wearing an amulet. Plus, poor people needed many children to make sure some survive to support them in their old age. They are our retirement plan. So, people weren't just poor because they breed, but they breed because they were poor. We are barefoot because we are pregnant. We are pregnant because we are barefoot. Still, Malthus' idea caught on, especially with the rich. Your problem is you to have too much. Malthus, by the way, is part of the reason economics come to be called the dismal science. The dismal part in case that wasn't clear. The science part came from Malthus' friend, the English economist David Ricardo. Possibly, he was the most important person nobody ever heard of. David Ricardo's principle of political economy and taxation is just what title says, a collection of logical, consistent, and abstract principles. Abstraction involves simplification. For instance, Ricardo simplified money to Ricardo things exchanged for things in proportion to the labor they took to make. So, a purchase of an egg or anything else was really just an exchange of labor for labor. 1 hour of iron miner's labor, 1 hour of coal miner's labor, and so on, sell for the amount of coal that takes like 4 and a fourth hours to mine and mint into coins. So it is add up for 1 hour, 1 hour, 1 hour, and 1 per fourth of carter's labor. The blacksmith labor, which count as 2 hours because of time it took to train the blacksmith. Something like this. So it was very simple, logical, and easy to be calculated. Ricardo also simplified people. His principle operates on economic man who thinks about his own gain, nothing else. The result of this and other simplification was the entire abstract economy, a collection of idealized model of Adam Smith's free market. Simplified doesn't necessarily mean simple. One of Ricardo's model, called comparative advantage, is the hairiest concept we'll cover in this book also. Let's check it out. So, in this model, Ricardo excluded all countries except England and Portugal. This is just example. And all products except wine and clothes. Obviously, if each country makes one thing more efficiently, it makes sense to specialize and trade. For example, one worker makes 2 casks of wine or 4 bundles of clothes per year, and the other one is one worker makes 4 casks of wine and 2 bundles of clothes per year. So you make wine, we'll make clothes, something like this. Now, let's imagine England is just plain inefficient. Does trade still make sense? Common sense says no. We are in the disadvantage here, so we let your cheap goods in. They would swim us. Why would we trade for the things we can make faster? This is just example for what will happen if the England one worker makes 2 casks of wine or 4 bundles of clothes per year, while the other one is one worker makes 4 casks of wine or 6 bundles of clothes per year. But, he says, if England switch, say, like 100 workers from making wine to making clothes, you will make 200 fewer casks of wine, but 400 more bundles of clothes. St. Portugal, 380 bundles, and you will still have 20 more than you started with, right? Then, if Portugal switch 60 workers from clothes to wine, you'll be make 360 fewer bundles of clothes, but that's okay because the English are sending you 380. Okay? And the 60 worker will make 240 more casks of wine, send 220 casks to England, and everyone has more stuff than they started with. These are the calculation. Don't worry. If you didn't get that at the first read, the point is that a simplified model of international trade gave us an insight that we might not have reached by observation alone. A country, even one at a disadvantage, can profit from free trade by specializing where it has less of disadvantage. It is called a comparative advantage. Almost immediately, David Ricardo's abstract approach called classical political economy took over economic thought. It is said a science. Adam Smith is often called a classical economist, but really, he was very different. His rich tapestry of real butcher and bakers making real decisions didn't much resemble the abstract, theoretical work of classical political economy. Classical political economy was well suited for classroom, and in the early 19th century, the mainstream of economic thought moved to academia. We'll be drawing mainstream economics like this from now on. Even today, most of the economics is a product of academia, and most of the economists think in terms of exact rigorous model, which is said science. But let's take another look at comparative advantage. Here are some real-world possibilities Ricardo simply excluded for his model to keep it simple. What's to stop British bosses from moving their operations to efficient Portugal, leaving British workers without jobs? What if the effort of shipping all the stuff is more than the gain from trade? What if trade breaks down? Portugal will have all the wine and no clothes. So the point is that the comparative advantage model may work in real world, but it also may not. By itself, a model doesn't prove anything. But Ricardo's model was compelling that people kept forgetting that, no matter how often economists try to remind them, and people still keep right on forgetting. We still hear things like this. So Alfred Massau said that greed is the useful of Ricardo's method, but even greater are the evils which may arise from a crude application of its suggestion to real problems. For that simplicity, which makes it helpful, also makes it deficient and treacherous. Free trade is always a good idea. Comparative advantage profit. For that matter, when we hear people say this, the free market always works, laissez-faire, they are not describing the real world. They are describing Ricardo's style abstract model. Step 1, assume the idealized free market. Step 2, perform calculation based on that assumption. Step 3, your calculation will show that the free market is ideal, which is not entirely coincidence. It works nicely for the rich and powerful. One reason, a model free market function like a finely tuned machine, assigning people an income based on how much they do for others. So in the textbook, perfect free market, if you are rich, it's because you deserve to be. How about we tax you and spend the money on me? That is say that we'll be throwing a wrench into the machine. We'd all wind up worse off. The idea that things are as they ought to be is always comforting, and people need to be comforted. In early 19th century, the real economy was going through wrench, confusing shift. The Industrial Revolution was changing everything. We will get to the next chapter, chapter 2, full steam ahead. See you in the next video.